Albany Transportation Commission to order. Can we have the roll call, please?
Commissioner Barnes.
Present.
Commissioner Javindal.
Present.
Commissioner McCroskey.
Present.
Commissioner Peng.
Present.
Chair Chomsky.
Present. I'll read the land acknowledgement. The City of Albany recognizes that we occupy the land originally protected by the Confederated Villages of Lishan. We acknowledge the genocide that took place on these lands and must make strides to repay the moral debt that is owed to this indigenous people, specifically the Ohlone tribe. We thank them for their contributions, which have transformed our community and will continue to bring forth growth and unity. The City of Albany commits to sustaining ongoing relationships with the tribe and together build a better future for all that now make this their home.
Before we go on to item 2, there is a request from Commissioner Barnes for the Commission to allow him to participate in this month's meeting remotely due to emergency circumstances as the result of a serious collision while cycling. Under the provisions of AB 2449 or Government Code Section 54953F, the Commission can now take action on this request before proceeding. So with that, if the Commission would take action on that request.
Do we need a motion?
I move that we welcome the Commissioner from remote.
I'll second that.
Great. I'll do roll call if there's no other discussion.
Any discussion?
Commissioner Barnes.
Here.
Commissioner Javindal.
Aye.
Commissioner McCroskey.
Aye.
Commissioner Peng.
Yes.
And Chair Chomsky.
Yes, the motion carries.
Great.
I was very sorry to hear about your accident and wish you a speedy recovery.
And
Thank you.
one,
It's going to be a long haul, but someday we'll have some beers and I'll tell you the whole gory story.
Please make sure you report so we all know the location. You said the police report is going to reflect that next month?
was
It was out of our jurisdiction.
Oh, not good, but.
Yeah.
one other logistical item with that. Commissioner Barnes, can you disclose whether any other individual over 18 is present in the room with you?
No, my son is staying with me, but he's out of the house right now. But if he comes back during the meeting, I will let you know.
Great. Thank you.
All right, let's move on to item 2, public comment. This is a time for people to make comments about items that are not on tonight's agenda. We can't take action on those items, but if anyone would like to speak on an item not on the agenda, now is the time. Do we have anybody in the room?
We have 2 members in the room, but I don't see any hands raised.
Okay. And people in the room to make public comment? No. Do we have anybody online to make public comment?
Oh, yeah, sorry. I meant to say 2 members online.
Online, okay.
And don't see any hands raised.
But no hands raised. Okay. All right. We had some public comment by email about mapping services. Do you want to speak to that now? Or
Yeah, I can speak to that. I'll just note that third-party navigation services have shifted primarily towards community sourcing data changes. I have notified a couple of the apps of the pilot changes we made, but they no longer reach out to me to find out about upcoming construction or upcoming changes. So I encourage folks to contact their own mapping service provider, notify them of the changes. Happy to include my contact information, but I have not heard from any of those software providers.
So just to be clear, this is about people wanting mapping services to update their route suggestions to incorporate changes to traffic flow rules in Albany. Sometimes mapping services are basing their directions on obsolete traffic flow configurations, and it sounds like the best way to fix that is for individuals to reach out to the mapping services rather than for the city government to take action on it. Yeah. Okay.
I'd just like to add that I think we may have passed through the age of exceptional mapping service based on the tech changes that are going on. And I've certainly noticed with in using Google Mapping that when you're out of the Bay Area, they're just not nearly as up to date on roads closed, bridges out, that sort of thing.
Okay, let's move on to tonight's agendized items. Item 3-1, monthly police data on collisions and citations.
Thank you, Chair. This is reporting on the month of April. There was one pedestrian-involved collision reported, one bicycle-involved collision reported this month. There were 13 reported collisions overall, 2 of which were report of injury collisions. 16 moving citations were issued in the month, and 5 DUI arrests were made. One other item for this presentation is just following up on a question of how scooter collisions would be reported from previous month. Police department staff did not recall any reported collisions involving electric scooters to date, but I've asked them to notify me if one is reported, and I'll share that here. Until it's more prevalent, I don't think including it monthly in the reporting is that useful. But the vehicle type options in their reporting do include electric scooters. That concludes my report.
Thank you. Any questions from commissioners? Any public comment on this item? Do we have any hands raised online? No. Commissioner comments? I just have one observation that I read in the newspaper today, that San Francisco supervisors are frustrated because apparently daily citations of unsafe driving behavior were at about 350 per day 10 years ago and are now at 10 per day. And they're concerned that the safety consequences of not having significant enforcement are preventing their Vision Zero program from succeeding. So the drops that we've seen in Albany and that people have commented on in past months, or the reduced number of citations compared to previous years, it's not just an Albany thing. Let's move on to item 3-2, quarterly shared mobility data.
Great. So first up, reporting on gig car share. In the first quarter, they saw 913 members, which was up 5% from the previous quarter. And they showed 1,570 trip starts, which was down over 20% from the prior quarter. That compares to about a 1% increase in trips in the overall service area in the region. So I've asked them to look into the difference here in Albany, and we'll report back if there's useful information there. The other thing they reported is that they're continuing to evaluate their pilot of EVs in the region and see how that could work here.
I'm sorry, pilot of?
Electric vehicle fleet. Other report is with the VO electric scooters. The first quarter this year saw a decline in fleet size and trips over last quarter. VO has communicated intent to increase that. This is the second time we're reporting on VO data. You saw a more complete picture of the kinds of data we have access to. This was an attempt to shift towards a regular reporting format to see some trends over time, as we do with our other data. I'm proposing here to use average fleet size and number of trips for the regular report out. Other options include the smaller graphs to the left that mirror the same trends, but slightly different version is maximum fleet size to get a sense of like the largest number of vehicles over that given week versus the average, and vehicle miles traveled versus the number of trips. So open to suggestions over what's the most useful for this group to see regularly.
Questions from the commission? Are you able to see if Michael raises his hand?
Oh, I can close this.
It's not on the screen anymore? Okay. And any public comment on this item? Discussion?
I was just going to say, I think that the average fleet size and number of trips seem like the most relevant to me. If it's not extra effort to show both, that's fine, but I don't want to create extra effort for diminishing returns.
I think ideally, I think the average fleet size is fine. I don't have a problem with that. Ideally, I'd love to see a line graph with the 2 lines of trips and miles traveled. But if these are canned graphs and that's not convenient, I would default to what you have on the right-hand side.
Okay.
Any other commission comments? Okay. So do you have the answers you were looking for? Or you're not?
That's great.
Don't need
Thanks.
anything more formal from us? Okay, for item 4, the consent calendar, the only item is the meeting minutes. Is there anybody on the commission who would like to pull that item for discussion? Is there anybody from the public who would like to discuss the meeting minutes? Okay, can we have a motion to approve the consent calendar?
I have to recuse myself. I wasn't there last time.
Right.
I'll move approval of the consent calendar.
I'll second.
Ready for roll call? Commissioner Barnes,
Aye.
Commissioner Javadel,
Aye.
Commissioner McCroskey,
Aye.
Commissioner Peng,
I was absent.
Chair McCroskey,
Chair Johnson.
Chair Chomsky.
Yes.
You're just putting out the date that I get to become chair, because obviously I was chair too long.
Okay. So we are ready for the meat of the evening, which is item 5-1, San Pablo Multimodal Corridor Program.
Great. Before I hand off to Alameda County Transportation Commission staff, I just wanted to reiterate a few things from the city staff memo on this item. San Pablo Avenue, as you know, has been a top priority for active transportation improvements in the city. Improving both transit efficiency and active transportation safety aligns with city goals, and the city is benefiting from the scale of Alameda CTC's corridor-wide approach to secure funding, to work through the Caltrans permitting, and to deliver this suite of projects. Staff has been working closely with Alameda CTC staff on project engagement with Albany stakeholders and to incorporate the prior direction from the Transportation Commission on several city-developed designs into these projects. And as will be described, Alamo CTC has been successful in securing regional, state, and federal funding to deliver these projects over the next several years. And finally, staff concurs with the Alameda CTC recommendation, which will be presented to you tonight, and we look forward to continuing to partner with Alameda CTC on final design and implementation. And with that, I'll introduce Matthew Bomberg, who's Senior Transportation Engineer at the Alameda County Transportation Commission, to present this item.
All right. Thank you very much, Justin, and thanks to the Commission for the opportunity to come present tonight. Just really do want to thank city staff for all of their partnership on this corridor project effort. Then I'll also want to introduce from our team Colin Dentalpost, who's a Principal Transportation Planner, and then joining remotely from our Consultant Planning and Design team, Kimley Horn, is Ryan Dole. So go ahead and go to the next slide. Justin's already sort of laid out the importance of the San Pablo Avenue corridor, but I'll just add from a countywide perspective, this San Pablo corridor is a major interjurisdictional transit route, one of AC Transit's highest ridership transit routes, the Line 72 series. It's on the Alameda County High Injury Network, which is the subset of roads throughout Alameda County that account for an outsized share of major traffic crashes. The entire length of the corridor is within Alameda County is a locally identified priority development area, has significant concentrations of regionally identified equity priority communities, and is also a just interjurisdictional travel route for vehicular travel with over 20,000 trips a day and Caltrans State Highway route. So for a variety of reasons, San Pablo Avenue corridor has been a focus for Alameda CTC dating back to 2017. And Alameda CTC embarked on a bi-county corridor planning effort at that time. It spanned several years, had the goals listed below to improve safety, comfort, and quality of trips, support economic development, and promote equity. And this was a significant effort, involved visioning for the corridor throughout both Alameda and Contra Costa counties, considering a variety of cross-sectional options for the San Pablo corridor, multiple rounds of public engagement with over 4,900 people weighing in, and in April 2019, there was a public workshop in Albany and at the City Council, which staff helped support. So, next slide, please.
Before you go on, would it be possible to lower the lights in the room so the screen is easier to see? Thank you.
Much better, thanks.
And so within Alameda County, there are a number of agency partners that Alameda CTC is working with on the San Pablo corridor, 4 different cities, AC Transit, the transit operator, and then Caltrans. Next slide, please. And so this graphic illustrates coming out of the sort of multi-year corridor planning effort, there were 3 near-term projects identified that collectively comprise the San Pablo Avenue Multimodal Corridor Program. And these projects differ. These are within Alameda County, and they differ by jurisdiction or by section of the corridor based on sort of local preferences from that corridor planning effort, as well as technical considerations. And in March of last year, March of 2022, Alameda CTC's commission adopted this corridor concept in these 3 projects as Alameda CTC's near-term set of projects to deliver for the San Pablo corridor within Alameda County within 3 to 5 years. And so at the southern end of the corridor, not within the city of Albany, the corridor concept calls for bus and bike lanes along San Pablo Avenue and repurposing traffic and parking lanes in order to put those on San Pablo through Oakland, Emeryville, and South Berkeley. At the northern end of the corridor in Berkeley and Albany, the proposed projects consist of safety enhancements along San Pablo to make it safer and easier for people to cross the street on foot and bike, as well as some targeted transit speed and reliability improvements. And then improvements to parallel routes to create continuous north-south neighborhood bikeway routes for all ages and ability cycling. Next slide, please. And of course, this is not happening within a vacuum. There are a number of projects already underway at the local level across all of the different project jurisdictions. Within Albany, there are a couple listed here that sort of touch the San Pablo corridor or the parallel bike routes. And so Alameda CTC's projects are coordinated with these, and we have either incorporated elements of the projects that the city had sort of initiated and taken through sort of concept planning, or in some cases, they're non-overlapping and they will work together to create continuous biking, walking routes. Next slide, please. So I'll touch a little more on the scope elements of the 2 projects within Albany now, and just some of the details of the key locations within the 2 projects. So this focuses on the Safety Enhancements Project, which is, again, the project along San Pablo Avenue. And so this project features include bus bulbs at AC Transit rapid stops to provide speed and reliability benefits for the buses and enhance space for passenger waiting. improvements at uncontrolled crossings of San Pablo Avenue. So there are a number of crossings with no more than a marked crosswalk today that this project would be looking to upgrade with pedestrian hybrid beacons or flashing beacons and median refuge islands. There are a number of locations where the project proposes to relocate bus stops from the near side of the intersection to the far side to improve the line of sight for oncoming motorists to pedestrians who might be crossing the street. When a bus is pulled out at the stop, it typically obstructs the line of sight for a near side crosswalk. At a number of locations, the project proposes to upgrade lighting at uncontrolled crossings so that lighting is placed such that pedestrians are not backlit for oncoming motorists. The project proposes ADA ramp upgrades and accessible pedestrian signal upgrades pretty much throughout the corridor. And then at a couple of locations of offset east-west bikeways where cyclists has to basically travel along San Pablo for a short distance, the project proposes short sections of protected bikeway connectors. Next slide, please. So I'll touch on a couple of the key locations here and just give you a sense of some of the design details of these locations. So this is the intersection of San Pablo Avenue and Marin. At this intersection, the project proposed ADA ramp upgrades, high visibility crossway upgrades, and then the project also includes elements to facilitate cyclists who are traveling along Marin Avenue accessing the existing two-way bike path along the south side of Marin, west of San Pablo. So you can see in the figure a two-stage Q-turn box with a protected island to shield bicyclists that allows somebody traveling westbound on a bike along Marin Avenue to make that turn and get into the two-way shared use path along Marin Avenue in a comfortable way. Next slide, please. This is the intersection of San Pablo Avenue and Solano Avenue, major intersection of two commercial corridors and a very high transit node, intersection of different transit routes as well. At this intersection, the project proposes ADA ramp upgrades with directional ramps where possible, high visibility crosswalk striping upgrades. And then this is one of the AC Transit rapid stop locations where bus bulbs would be constructed as part of the project. One of the key sort of details with respect to the bus bulbs is exactly how long they are. There's sort of a trade-off between length of stop, which provides operational flexibility for AC Transit and parking. And so we did do outreach to all of the different businesses here, and also in talking with AC Transit, there are some existing issues of the stops not being long enough, which results in buses sticking out into the intersection along Solano when multiple buses arrive simultaneously. And so based on the outreach and technical considerations, the bus bulbs are proposed to lengthen the stops, removing 2 parking spaces in each direction to provide more length of stop and address that issue of buses getting stuck in the intersection. But I'll note this is somewhat of a compromise between sort of the maximum length of stop that might be desired to sort of consider all possible scenarios of future articulated buses running down the corridor. So we're really trying to balance sort of transit operations and parking with this location. Next slide, please. So this is the intersection of San Pablo Avenue and Washington Avenue, and this is an intersection that the city has previously studied and the Transportation Commission has previously reviewed. And so the Alameda CTC project does incorporate a design based on past city planning and design work and direction from this Transportation Commission, which involves signalizing the east leg of Washington Avenue. Currently, one leg is signalized and one leg is not. And then marking bike crossings and implementing signal phasing so that bikes who want to travel east-west along Washington Avenue but need to travel this short distance along San Pablo Avenue to make the connection can travel sort of in phasing where they are not mixing with mainline San Pablo traffic. Next slide, please. So this is just a little more of a a graphic to illustrate what that signal operation would be like. So there would be essentially three major phases. The first is San Pablo mainline traffic. The second, the middle box here with the red is sort of east-west turning traffic coming onto San Pablo Avenue. And then the third would be left turns from San Pablo onto Washington. So essentially a bike wanting to make this connection is never mixing with mainline San Pablo Avenue traffic. Next slide, please. This location did generate a significant amount of interest in the different outreach that we've done as part of this project. I know a couple of you were able to attend the community open house that we held and have given input through other forums. There was some desire for a protected bikeway style design here, a class 4 either on the west side or the east side. We did consider it, and we are recommending the design option that is consistent with past Transportation Commission direction and has actually already been vetted somewhat with Caltrans. Justin could talk more about this, but there have been some field testing with Caltrans staff regarding that signal operation to verify that it could work. The class 4 option, we did consider it, and there are just a number of challenges related to available width along San Pablo Avenue to fit a two-way bikeway, as well as just driveways and parking demand. Next slide, please. And then this is the last location I'll focus on as part of the Safety Enhancements project. So this is the connection between Brighton Avenue and Clay Street. So this is a somewhat longer offset bike crossing than the Washington one. And at this location, the proposed design includes class 4 bikeways along San Pablo Avenue for this block between Brighton and Clay. The land use is fairly supportive, with one side being a large, pretty much single use with a large surface parking lot, and the other side being the Albany Bowl redevelopment site. And then the class 1 fits well within the parking lane and works with sort of the existing signal operations. Next slide, please. And this was another location where there was a lot of interest as part of the public outreach that we did. And there was some interest from community members in pursuing a two-way protected bikeway design on the Albany Bowl side, similar to what the city has already implemented at in front of the Sprouts north of Dartmouth. We did review that, but there were, again, some challenges with just the available width to fit a class 4 and within the parking lane. And then the design at, in front of Sprouts actually used some of what was previously the sidewalk width, but that would pose a number of challenges just in terms of tree and utility impacts. So that's why we are recommending the one-way class 1 design. Next slide, please. So I'll shift now to the parallel bike project. And this project, again, consists of improvements not along San Pablo, but along sort of north-south streets that provide access parallel to San Pablo itself. So this project includes scope elements like traffic calming elements to manage volumes and speeds along neighborhood bikeway streets. At major street crossings, so these arterial and collector type streets, the project would install treatments such as median refuges or flashing beacons to assist cyclists in crossing those major streets. And then the project would also include wayfinding, ramp upgrades, some changes to stop controls, and then bulb outs at some of the major street crossings. And this project, again, is in Albany, Berkeley, and actually a portion of it is in North Oakland as well. So some of these elements are not present within Albany. Next slide, please. So I'll focus on one location here, which is the crossing of Marin Avenue along Kane Street. So this is a location where the proposed design would install a median island, sort of extending the existing median island to that exists to the west of Kane Street. This would restrict some of the turning movements onto and out of Kane Street, the left turns in particular. but that has some benefits of left turners not being in conflict with pedestrians and cyclists. And I'm sure we've all experienced trying to make a left turn out of a residential street onto a major arterial is a difficult task for a driver, and trying to also spot a cyclist or a pedestrian at the same time just adds to the complexity. And then the median also allows pedestrians and cyclists to cross in 2 stages. And then in addition to the median island, the proposed design would include a pedestrian hybrid beacon, which would fully stop traffic and give pedestrians and cyclists the right-of-way when crossing. We are anticipating, given the proximity to San Pablo, that the PET hybrid beacon will need to be interconnected with the San Pablo Marin signal so that it doesn't just immediately stop traffic and cause backups to San Pablo, so that they work together in terms of coordinated timing. And I'll note also that this is a location where the initial proposal was a flashing beacon, and we received significant feedback from the community that for a street as wide and as high traffic volume as Marin Avenue, that was not a sufficient level of traffic control device for getting pedestrians and cyclists across the street. So we did modify the design here in response to feedback. Next slide, please. So this is a summary of all of the different outreach activities that we've been doing for the safety enhancement and parallel bikeways components of San Pablo Corridor, really to get up to the Transportation Commission presentation. And we're planning a similar presentation for Berkeley in the coming months as well. So we've done a variety of different online and in-person outreach, and we've notified people in a variety of ways, including multiple rounds of mailers, flyers at bus stops. We've presented to groups including a Project Active Transportation Working Group, which includes Albany Strollers and Rollers. We've presented to the Albany Chamber of Commerce and other sort of neighborhood and merchant groups. We did direct outreach to all of the storefronts along San Pablo where there are proposed parking changes. And we held an open house in March that was very well attended with over 100 people. Next slide, please. I will hit this really quickly because it's a lot on this slide, and I know you're all probably eager to provide input, but this is just a summary of the different themes that we've heard across all 3 jurisdictions and all of the different outreach sort of platforms and methods. We've received over 700 comments, so this is a significant distillation of all the detailed input we've heard, but we received comments related to the routing and facility type of some of the parallel bikeway routes, particularly in Berkeley and Albany, the level of traffic control device at major street crossings, Cambridge Marin being a key location where those comments came in. There were some comments wanting additional stop control changes and speed humps along some of the parallel bike streets. In Albany, we did discuss this with staff, and the parallel bike streets within Albany are Canes and Adams, and because of the city's existing 2-way bikeway pilot project on those streets, and just sort of out of respect for the fact that pilot is still in process, we're not proposing additional stop control changes or speed humps along those streets as part of this project. And then there were also comments related to signal operation changes, particularly people wanting pedestrian recall as part of the project, which is where the walk signs automatically come up for pedestrians. Some suggestions for improvements just that were not along proposed project streets, people highlighting the importance of just accessibility as part of the design. More in Berkeley, some concerns about traffic redistribution from some of the diverters. So some comments related to bus stops, just issues of trash and security at bus stops. And then a number of comments that were really getting into the details of the design that we'll be considering as we move into final design. Next slide. And then just within Albany, I think I've discussed pretty much all of these locations, but these were the locations that generated the highest volume of comments. San Pablo Castro was really just, that was one specific business who had concerns about the proposed parking changes associated with a bus stop relocation. Next slide, please. So our next steps, as mentioned, we're currently presenting the transportation commissions and ultimately councils in Albany and Berkeley and seeking an approval of the concept design. Once we get that approval, we'll be moving into environmentally clearing the projects through both CEQA and NEPA. The safety enhancements component, which is the on San Pablo portion, will require what's called a Caltrans project report, which is sort of their formal approval of the design of the project, and then we'll be moving into final design. Next slide. And this is just a summary of the schedule for the two projects. We've been very fortunate to be successful in bringing in $44 million in grants combined between the safety enhancements and parallel bike projects, a mix of different state and federal grants. So we're in a very good position from a funding perspective, but that also means that these projects have committed schedules that they need to be implemented by now to meet grant requirements. And so the parallel bike project, we are expecting to have ready for construction by fall of next year. And then the safety enhancements project would follow after that, just due to the Caltrans process. That takes a bit longer. Next slide. And so I'll conclude with the action that we're seeking tonight from the Transportation Commission. We are asking that the Commission recommend that City Council approve the conceptual design for the two project components that were discussed, the safety enhancement and parallel bike improvements, which are the two components within Albany, and then direct staff to continue to work with us as they've been doing so well on final design and implementation. And the purpose of this action is really to just establish the basic project features and types of facilities before we enter the environmental and final design process. Again, this is a grant-funded project with kind of set funding and schedule. And we've done a significant amount of outreach to get to where we are tonight. So we're definitely interested in the input from the Commission, but we're also really hopeful we'll get this approved tonight so we can stay on track for implementing these important projects. With that, I'll wrap up and happy to take any questions.
Thanks. That was a really great presentation. I appreciated how you covered every important point and moved through it all very efficiently so that we can move on to questions and discussion. We have lots of time for that. I know I'm going to have a number of follow-up questions about some of the details that you touched on. So let's plan to take some time with questions. I think if there are, if some people on the Commission or in the public have concerns or want to talk about other alternatives, it would be great if we can daylight the issues and the problems early, like now in this question period, so that when we get to public comment, people won't be saying, oh yeah, you should do plan ABC when you have a perfectly good reason why it's not possible. let's try to cover, and also if there's a new idea that people want to introduce that wasn't part of the plan, let's get that out into the discussion so that people in the public can comment on it too. I don't want to be in a frustrating situation where we finish public comment and then our meeting goes in all these other interesting directions and people don't have a chance to comment on it. So let's try to have a substantial question period now. Is there a commissioner who would like to begin?
I would just suggest if you really want to flesh that out, maybe you want to go intersection by intersection?
Sure. Well, yeah, it might, does anybody have general questions before we do that? Take that as a no. Okay, so let's start with some of the most challenging intersections like the Washington crossing. That seems like one that it's a complicated proposal, and I know I have a couple of questions about it. Are there other commissioners who want to ask questions about the bike the facilitation of bike crossing at Washington?
So I have one question. So if I understand right, you're going to add a traffic lights to the Washington and the San Pablo, correct?
Correct. Yeah, the leg that's not currently signalized would be signalized.
Can you put the map up on the screen while we talk about it?
Sure, give me a second.
So the distance between the existing street lights to the proposed new lights is around like 180 foot. So those, yeah, can you go back to the previous slides? First of all, I like the way it is. I think there's a lot of constraint you have to work with. It's not like you can just draw a line and here we go, right? So I understand that you work on a lot of constraint. The question is, the spacing of the two lights are pretty close. So is there any way that we can synchronize the lights? Because what happened to very closely spaced lights are that drivers, once they pass the first one, they barely notice the second one. In one of the sites outside of Albany that we designed, the biggest concern is like drivers never notice like, oh, within 200 feet there's another light. So they always run past red lights and cause some accidents. So if possible, maybe we can synchronize those two lights together. As a comment. I don't want to drag down this project.
Why don't we have the consultants answer the questions as we go?
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be the idea, is that the east and west leg would operate as a single signal.
And that's part of how we got Caltrans on board with the idea is it's not a new signal, it's treating a new leg to the existing signalized intersection.
And it would also, I don't think I mentioned this when I was going through it, but signalizing the east leg would also just have some benefits for people wanting to make turns out of that east leg onto San Pablo. Currently have to do that with an uncontrolled movement.
Any other questions? Go ahead.
How long would the phase for cyclists using the turn be?
We haven't yet gotten to the point of the design where we're developing the timing plan, but it would be long enough that they could clear the intersection comfortably and not get stuck in the intersection.
So, well, that leads me to ask, who are we targeting for this improvement? In my experience, the folks that I've heard asking for this improvement the most are families. And in my observations as a person in the mix here of biking in Albany, more advanced cyclists seem to find that Solano works for them for crossing San Pablo. And I think, as I said, I think this is more of an improvement for families and for a range of abilities. So I'm thinking of everybody from training wheels to geriatric. What can you tell us about the willingness of all ability cyclists to use a median on-street facility like this that is also open to motorized vehicles?
I think the concern would really be if somebody is like stuck in the middle of San Pablo with traffic whizzing by them on either side. And the way this is intended to operate is that they get through a cyclist crossing gets through the intersection before any mainline traffic on San Pablo is entering the intersection. So we're definitely sensitive to how somebody might feel when they're in San Pablo Avenue, which is a wide major street on a bike and a range of levels of comfort. But again, the way this is designed to operate is that that high-speed traffic on San Pablo is not mixing with cyclists, be they confident or not confident who are crossing.
Well,
yeah, I'll also mention, because there are essentially two movements happening. You can see here in the diagram that there's the two left turn movements happening in red. The design would also include a raised median so that two opposing movements are separated. But really, the only traffic that would be mixing with bikes crossing San Pablo would be vehicles that are also crossing San Pablo from one leg of Washington to the other, and it's not a very prominent movement.
it's not a very prominent movement, but those vehicles are allowed in that phase and could be directly behind and certainly at the stoplight next to cyclists. Was consideration given to the idea of eliminating those vehicle turn movements? I'm sorry, motorized vehicle turn movements and making a central protected two-way bikeway?
Yeah, I'll ask the city to chime in as well, because this does build significantly on some of the alternatives analysis that the city's done previously. But I think, like I mentioned, that the vehicles that would be doing this would be those traveling from one leg of Washington to the other. So if you were to eliminate the left turn pockets, you'd be eliminating the ability of anybody to make a left turn from San Pablo onto Washington, which has broader neighborhood circulation impacts.
Well, actually, no, you wouldn't be eliminating the ability of anybody to make that turn. You would be eliminating the ability of motorized vehicles to make that turn. Sorry, I've got to make that distinction.
Maybe Justin didn't want to chime in here.
Yeah, some of this, your institutional knowledge predates even mine, but there was an initial concept that the commission looked at that had utilized the median space for a two-way cycle track. That was deemed to be unsafe or not favored. Then the commission looked at cycle tracks on the east or west side. The west side was reviewed initially with Caltrans and part of the, I think, the sort of initial concept. Caltrans had concerns about the driveway conflicts, about compliance, issues with the auto uses nearby, and the safety and comfort of that facility in and of itself. And in conversations with Caltrans, like the idea of signalized came up and was presented back, was developed into this phasing here to get the cyclists through, and brought back to the commission for consideration. The commission recommended that alternative and also made a note at that discussion that that didn't preclude adding the signal, and doing it this way didn't preclude deciding in the future to add a different kind of facility for cyclists between, but that was the direction that was given at the time.
I just want to say that that process did happen, and as you say, and I came out of that process feeling that the process wasn't complete. And I don't know if Fareed felt similarly, but
Let's move on.
Yep.
We'll have time to discuss
Sure.
what did and didn't work in that process when we're in our final discussion period. But anything more in the form of a question?
I do.
Go ahead.
First off, I'll say I recognize this as sort of a compromise design. It's not super low stress, it's not super high stress, it's kind of in the middle. And we recognize the constraints, so I'm not going to delve into that. In terms of the phasing that you've got here, I get that this is preliminary. And I'm sure that as you proceed, if we proceed with this, there'll be some refinements, such as the phase one, cutting off the first green light as you're approaching and leaving the other one on for a couple seconds, so vehicles that are sort of in the in-between block can clear out. So, you know, that when you go to the second phase and cars and bikes make that right turn to get into the left turn pocket, they're not going to be blocked by vehicles that are already in that in the through lanes of that block. Certainly during the morning peak, I see that all the time. That cars are backed up there. So if we provide an opportunity for cars to clear out, again, this is getting in the weeds, so I don't need to get too detailed on it. The other thing is sort of a question that you don't necessarily have to answer now, but for phase three, with those left turn only phasings, certainly the south crosswalk looks like that could be green for pedestrians to cross at the same time. We don't have a north crosswalk. I don't know if you've gotten into looking at how pedestrians might have more opportunity to cross during that left turn phase on the phase sequence number 3. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think, see if Ryan Dole from Kinley Horn is
Yeah,
line wants to address that.
Good evening, everyone. We did consider that. One of the concerns is if, and just to clarify, I think the comment is whether or not we investigated relocating the crosswalk at the western leg to the north side of the intersection. We did look at it. One of the constraints we have there is there's a driveway that's on the east side that would be somewhat in the area and as well as some doorways for the businesses. So it just provides some constraints on where we would put the curb ramp, relocate the traffic signal pole that's there too, and all the various other restrictions we'd have.
Okay. So it sounds like really the south crosswalk is the one that pedestrians can cross, certainly during phase 3, maybe during phase 2, depending on whether we're doing a permissive left turn coming out of the east leg of Washington. Anyway, now I'm getting way too far in the weeds, but I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Does Michael have any questions?
He does have his
I do.
hand raised.
I raised my hand, but I don't know if you can see it. Oh, yeah, my hand is raised. Shall I go ahead?
Yes, please.
Hey, my concern is, especially after AUSD wrote us the letter, is about kids wanting to cross here during school hours at a time when the traffic flow is pretty high. So I just want to clarify that first, Fareed said that, in phase sequence 1, there'll be some clearing out time. But my assumption in phase sequence 2 is that both lights will be in phase and there will be no movement of cars in that area except for cars making the left-hand turns along with cyclists. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. The way this is intended to operate is that all of the mainline San Pablo traffic in phase sequence 1 is cleared out so there would need to be some staggering of the greens so that one of them gives people a couple of extra seconds to clear the intersection.
And also, I actually am in this area a lot when I drop off my car at my mechanic. But these in the middle of the diagram, I'm a little confused. What is the significance of the yellow colors? Because the yellow colors in the crosswalk is not in phase 1, it's only one in phase 3, but both are yellow in phase 2. Does that mean that those crosswalks would be there and open for pedestrians? Right.
I think there is a existing one. I think there's an existing cross, right? Maybe there's some typo in the diagram or something.
I think the crosswalks yellow are illustrating when pedestrian walk is
But
given.
there are existing crosswalks there now, that's my question.
Yeah, those are the existing crosswalks, and the yellow indicates, it's just
So here's
when the walk's
my point. If you're on Washington to the west and you're heading eastbound towards San Pablo, a nervous child needing to get to the middle school would have the option of either making the turn and, continuing on their bicycle, or they could just get off their bicycle and walk across the street there. I'm just concerned that, a kid might panic a little bit, but they can always just jump off their bike and just walk it across the street. And maybe as they get older, more confident, then they can do the left-hand turn thing. Is that reasonable?
That's correct. They would be able to cross with the pedestrian cycle either at the West Washington approach or the East Washington approach, which would now be signalized under this design.
That was my question, thanks.
Okay. I think people have covered a lot of my questions, but I may want to ask them again just to try to get as clear as possible an answer. So during that phase 2, is the intention that this will be like a Sunday streets experience with bicycles riding through this expansive pavement that doesn't have any cars in it, not even stopped cars?
It wouldn't necessarily be completely free of cars. So,
Yeah,
the Washington legs are mixed vehicle and bicyclist. They're a Class 3 bikeway facility. So there could be some right-turning vehicles that turn from Washington onto San Pablo, but they would only get in the left turn pocket along with the bikes if they are also going from one leg of Washington to the other.
So the only,
Otherwise, they would go about 100 feet and then stop again, so they would never get up to.
okay, but, so the intention is that all of the traffic that is on San Pablo and continuing on San Pablo will clear out of this this short section before phase 2 begins.
Exactly. Any traffic that's on San Pablo and continuing on San Pablo would clear out before any side street traffic enters the intersection.
Okay, so the cars, the moving cars that bicycle riders will be contending with during this adventure are exactly the same set of moving cars that they were contending with while they were riding on Washington 30 seconds earlier.
Yeah, correct. The Class 3 bikeway facility traffic is the same traffic that would be entering.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that. Can you talk about how this gets activated? Is there a button that bike riders have to press? Does this just happen? Is there video detection, or does this just happen in a regular cycle?
That is a detail we've not gotten to yet, but it would most likely be either inductive loops or video detection.
Okay, so most likely not having to take action to press a button. If you're waiting in the right place, it'll just turn for you.
Yeah.
Okay, and this is not a bicycle signal head. This is a regular green light, and bike riders need to know that this is the right time for them to enter. Is that?
Yeah, Ryan.
I'm just kind of wondering about the education, so that a not very confident bike rider, how will they know that the part of the San Pablo riding experience they're about to venture into is going to be this quieter version of San Pablo rather than the usual San Pablo?
Yeah, from the Washington standpoint, we haven't explored whether or not we would use bicycle signal heads. We'd have to explore that a little bit just to make sure that we're conforming with the proper usage of those, and whether there may be some conflicts with the regular signal heads. As I'm kind of pondering on it right now, nothing's coming to mind that potentially would restrict it. So it is something we could explore, but we haven't actually discussed to that detail yet.
Okay, thanks.
There aren't any exclusive bike phases that would necessitate the use of a bike signal.
Okay. And my final question is about you mentioned that some alternatives were considered, and I think some of those I learned about when I read the 2018 meeting notes from a time when I believe I was on the commission and should remember, but it was really good to go back and see it in print, so thanks for digging that up for us. But one idea that I didn't see mentioned in those notes was the possibility of an east side cycle track, which would necessitate removing maybe 5 or 6 parking spaces along the east side and providing a fully protected bikeway with no additional signal head at the southern crossing, the southern intersection of Washington and San Pablo. So can you talk about some of the reasons why that was ruled out?
I can start, and Justin, you can add. So whether it's on the west side or the east side, width is a constraint. The parking lane is 8 feet wide, and the minimum width for a two-way protected bikeway is 8 feet, and that's not including the buffer width. And actually some draft new Caltrans design guidance that's been floating around and maybe adopted as earlier this year would increase the minimum width to 10 foot. Plus you need a couple of feet for a buffer. So it would basically involve encroaching into the outer vehicle lane and shifting everything over, which just creates some issues in terms of everything lining up in the intersection. The other issue is just that the east side land use is a mix of a lot of different small businesses, some of which have pretty high turnover parking. There's restaurants with delivery drivers, laundromats with people unloading heavy laundry. Just from a land use perspective, it's different than some of the other sections along the corridor where we are looking at Class 4 bikeway perspective, just because of the number of different businesses and the mix of type of businesses. So parking trade-offs are quite significant on the east side.
So just as far as the width question, is there a possibility of reducing the sidewalk width to make room for the amount of width that would be needed for the cycle track?
That is a level of improvement we're not really contemplating as part of the project, just because of the utility and tree conflicts when you start encroaching into the sidewalk. And again, we actually do have a sort of set grant scope and schedule now, and that would potentially kick us into a level of improvement.
So the cost saving from not having to add a signal at that southern crossing wouldn't balance out the additional cost of having to move that curb? Is that what you're suggesting?
It's about both cost, but also just utility coordination and
The logistical
yeah,
challenges.
and I think also you're then reducing the pedestrian realm along a major commercial corridor. You'd be pinching down the sidewalk width where you've got large groups of pedestrians walking side by side, businesses with doors that swing open. So it has some trade-offs just in terms of multimodal experience as well.
I can certainly imagine there would be trade-offs, definitely the parking trade-offs that you mentioned. I just want to make sure that we know what the range of possibilities is so that we can know whether to bother considering those trade-offs. But I think you've answered my question there. So
I'll just add briefly, I think the ruling out the eastern side predated me, but when I was involved in the discussion and looking at the western side and the signal concept, that we did discuss how much parking strip and sidewalk was available, and that it was on that side, and I believe it's the same widths on the east side, going to be a pretty constrained facility, as well as a pretty constrained sidewalk facility at that point.
okay. All right, so still in this question phase, are we ready to move on to a different intersection? I believe so. Let's tackle Keynes and Marin. Anybody on the commission like to ask a question about this? I guess I would ask the same question about this that I did about Washington, which is activation. Would this be by a push button or by video detection? So I guess it wouldn't be on a regular cycle. This wouldn't be a light that would just turn green for the bikes automatically, because it would only happen if a bike activated it explicitly, right?
Yeah, so this is a detail that can continue to be refined, but right now we are actually proposing a bicycle push button. You can see it on the graphic if you squint. There would be one that is, yeah, thanks for pointing it out. When I point here, you and nobody online can see, of course, but yeah, it would be in a location easily reached by the cyclist, so they don't have to get up on the curb or dismount.
Okay, great. And I guess my other question, I'm going to venture into a proposal here, but it seems to me that Albany may need to consider improving motorist traffic flow in the westbound direction through this area, because I believe that the queuing problems are not necessarily acceptable in the way they are right now. And I want to leave open the possibility of Albany removing some bulb outs on that north side and opening up the second lane for westbound motorists before they reach Keynes, so somewhere between Stanage and Keynes, expanding to 2 lanes and having 2 westbound lanes all the way through that intersection. So is there anything in this design that would interfere with a future plan like that? I know you're talking about it, installing some concrete for the median refuge. Yes, that's the word I'm looking for. If we were to want to expand the motorist roadway there, would that refuge still want to be in the same place where we're putting it now?
If the proposal would be to convert the bulb outs to a future travel lane, then I wouldn't think the median would need to shift. We're not proposing through the design to modify the bulb outs in any way. There would be new signal poles installed, so depending on where those are placed, those could be in conflict with the future travel lane, but those could also be placed where they're somewhat flexible in terms of whether the bulb out stays or goes down the line, depending on what the city's desire is.
So this plan could be built in a way that is consistent with the future Albany change like I'm describing?
Yes. Ryan, does that sound?
Yeah, your point about the traffic signal poles, if the poles for the PHBs, particularly the large mast arm on the northern side, that would be a little difficult to remove if the bulb outs came at a later date. Sorry, the bulb out removal came at a later date.
If I might ask sort of a connected question, then would that lead us to considering putting the mast arms, or the poles anyway, on the median rather than at the side of the street? So that if we change the curb line at the side, it makes no difference if the poles are all in the median.
I would
Could
think
be
that could be an
explored.
option.
Just something to consider. I mean, we can move poles. It's not that it's impossible to do. It's more money to do it later versus setting the poles back further so that they would work with either the existing or future curb line. But I'm just throwing out a different alternative, which would be to just put them in the median on the presumption that the median's not going to move. And there may be other considerations, so I'll just leave it there.
Okay. Any other questions about this location? Michelle, I'm kind of counting on you to see if Michael ever speaks up.
Doesn't have his hand raised right now. I'll watch.
And let's see, another location that might warrant some questions is the northern intersection with, is it Brighton Clay area? Any questions about that? Okay, I don't see any. I don't have any other specific intersections in mind. Is there another specific intersection that people want to ask questions about? Are there any general questions that are not specific to an intersection? Okay, I think then we are ready to move on to public comment. I don't see anybody in the room. Can you give me an idea of how many people are online?
We have 4 members of the public online, and we currently have 1 hand raised.
Okay, well, we can certainly do 3 minutes each then.
Okay, Carrie Schulman, please go ahead.
So first of all, I want to say thank you for working on this project. There's some really exciting changes happening, so it's going to be really great. That said, I have to say I'm really disappointed with the proposal for Washington, the crossing at Washington. I have kids attending Ocean View Elementary, and we live east of San Pablo, and we bike every day. It's not pouring rain, and getting across San Pablo is the most difficult part of our bike ride to school. And there's a lot of other families too that have to cross San Pablo to get to Ocean View. And the way it is now, so as a parent, my number one fear is my kids mixing with cars. that's really scary for me. I worry that my kids are small and that cars are not going to see them and they're going to run over my kids. So I'm not okay with them biking in that crazy left turn, mixing with cars like that. I really wish you could reconsider doing the two-way bike lane on the east side of San Pablo. I feel so much more comfortable with protected bike lanes, and the Safe Route to School plan proposes that all kids get to school with a bike route. So it'd be a shame to put all this effort in, and then the Safe Route to School plan kicks in, and now you have to build bike lanes anyway somewhere. So may as well just build bike lanes now, do it right from the get-go. I think the parking concern, it shouldn't be an issue because Washington around the corner from the liquor store has plenty of parking. You could paint that green, so it's really easy for people to park on Washington and access the laundromat and the liquor store and do pickup from the restaurant. So the parking should not be an issue. But having kids bike along with cars over the intersection is just not safe. I also want to mention, I noticed that at the Marin San Pablo intersection, you added a pedestrian lead light recently, which is awesome. But you also removed the pedestrian lead light at Solano Avenue. And both of those intersections have a lot of car traffic and a lot of pedestrian traffic. So they really could use a pedestrian lead light at both locations. And at Keynes and Adams bicycle boulevards, please add stop signs for the east-west cross traffic along those routes. Because when you're biking down that route, it's really hard to be always looking for the cross traffic. So if there could be stop signs there, that would be really great. But most importantly, San Pablo Avenue, please consider re-adding the protected bike lane. Because I just would not let my kids do the way it is now. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Next.
I don't see any other hands raised.
Okay. Well, then let's bring it back for discussion.
I think I'll just maybe follow up on the comment we just heard. As far as the stop signs for Keynes or Adams, as was mentioned in the presentation, that's something that right now we've got the pilot in place, and it'd be good to see how effective the pilot is before we change that. Whether our timeline as a city on that pilot is going to be complete before 2025, when hopefully this project is going to construction, that's a small change. I don't think that that will really change the design of this project if we put those stop signs in there. I will say that if we do that, the sort of stop sign every 2-block pattern going east and west on Washington, et cetera, would probably change. And I think we've talked in the past about moving stop sign to Cornell so that people going north-south on Cornell would be crossing at a 4-way stop. In other words, I wouldn't just add a stop sign there. I think we'd be looking at shifting stop signs and changing the pattern. But I'm also saying that I think that that's something that the city could do at any time once we feel that the pilot has completed the pilot phase. So that's kind of my thought there, is we don't have to incorporate it into this, but it's a good thing to consider once we're done with the pilot we've got going right now. And if we were to do that in future, that would also hopefully improve the usability of the Keynes and Adams bike routes to get to Marin, which once you get onto the bike path, that's a whole lot easier than riding on the streets east and west of San Pablo on Washington. So I think getting people to the off-street path would be the top priority if we want low stress getting to Ocean View. I get that depending on where you're starting and ending your trips, that's not always the winning solution. But
Can you just say that again? I lost track of what locations you were.
so when my kids were younger, biking we live west of San Pablo, biking to the middle school, we would bike up the Buchanan bike path, up Marin. I'd ride in the bike lanes. They were little, they'd ride on the sidewalks until we got to the Ohlone Greenway. I did not ride with them on Washington when they were in elementary school or middle school. By the time they got to high school, they wanted to ride on Washington because it was the shortest route to the high school. And so I feel like, as much as I'd love every route to be all ages and abilities, maybe that's not something we can quite pull off in this particular case, especially because Washington itself, east and west of San Pablo, is a shared street. So if what we are doing with this project is making sure that the crossing of San Pablo is not higher stress than the rest of the route, we've achieved something. And I will say that I do see some younger kids riding that route, and they ride on the sidewalk. So as much as I agree with the sentiment of the comment and wishing that it was totally low stress, it'd be a low stress island in the middle of a route that's not low stress. And so I don't think we should get too caught up in trying to achieve that right now. I kind of feel awkward saying that, but just pragmatically, I think that that's our realistic path forward. But again, the point being, the Marin Buchanan Bikeway is better as a low-stress route, especially west of San Pablo.
And I think what I also hear you saying is that for a substantial group of younger kids, they're going to be riding on the sidewalk anyway. So,
right. Not that I think that's the ideal,
option,
but
so the option in the proposed design where they cross San Pablo in the crosswalk and then ride along the restaurant row there on the sidewalk is consistent with the way they're riding the rest of the route.
Right. That's correct. And I see both behaviors. I see the stronger, more confident cyclists using the street and the younger, more cautious ones using the sidewalk.
So do you see a cohort of riders who would substantially benefit from the proposed crossing design?
I think so. And I think that, again, it really depends on origins and destinations. But right now, it's much easier if I'm headed eastbound on Washington to turn left on San Pablo, ride in the traffic lane, and then turn right on Portland to get to the high school or middle school. Turning right to get to the other leg of Washington is much harder. This would make that feasible, and if then people want to ride up Washington, which is designated as a bike route, it gives them access to that. Right now, they don't have access to that bike route. So I think there is an incremental improvement of doing this.
I agree about your assertion that many users are still going to continue to ride on the sidewalk. I think that's a reasonable expectation. I've spoken a lot with the public commenter, and I think one of her assertions is that going south across Solano and to Marin is not ideal. We're talking about a two-stage crossing at Marin. Crossing Solano is trafficky. And I would say that Washington is not ideal, but we're also talking about something that's just a block from Keynes. And Keynes north of Solano is fairly calm, but not at Solano. Okay. Just to respond to your assertions, I want to get that out there. And I also want to say, this is a huge project, and there's a lot of good in it. And I'm going to pick at it, but I want to say that I think you've done a great job of engaging the public. I appreciate you taking things that I for one, have brought up, like the intersection of Keynes and Marin, into account, and raising that level of intersection design. So thank you for all of this. And my picking should not take away from my appreciation or your perception of my appreciation of this project in general. It's really interesting, you know, talking about this Washington intersection. I mean, it is sort of a link in a chain. How, you know, whether it's the best link or, you know, does it raise the rest of the chain up to equality? It's certainly a desire line. And we've kind of reached a point where we've explored the options, that there are a lot of things that don't pencil out space-wise. And, you know, Fareed and I are just figuring that people are going to ride on the sidewalk unless they're pretty skilled cyclists. Is that a terrible outcome? I don't know. I understand you're on a schedule. I don't want to derail the project or derail the schedule or increase the costs out of proportion. We're talking about a solution that we don't have an example of locally. This kind of split intersection with you know, a solution in the middle. It's hard for me to know, and I think for the public as well, to know how useful this would be. Is there an opportunity to do a demonstration of what this might look like? I'll just throw that out there.
I'll actually turn it over to Justin, just because there has been some demonstration, not necessarily from a bicyclist user perspective, but just in terms of how the signal would operate.
Yeah, I mean, I think that,
Demonstration by engineers for engineers rather than for the general public.
let me clarify, yeah, the demonstration that we did with Caltrans was just to test the impact of the proposed change in the phasing on San Pablo for San Pablo traffic. That's what Caltrans was focused on with our proposal. For getting a sense of how this would operate as a cyclist, I mean, I think the challenge is we don't have a signalized approach, how we would go
We'd
about
have to
doing
have a
that.
flagger standing there with, you know, go and don't and stop signs in their hand.
Well, Brighton and Clay is the mirror image. So if you wanted to do a signal timing test and Caltrans was willing, you could try it there. Dimensions are a little different, I think, but
All right, so this is just a suggestion in the process. I would like to second the interest in not ruling out between Keynes and San Pablo at Marin some reconfiguration of the space to help throughput issues in that area. So whether it's locating the signal mass in the median or back from the edge of the bulb out, I think that makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of trees there, which could make it difficult. I would say on the Brighton intersection that having two the way it's configured, and maybe we can bring it up, I don't think that it removes conflict between vehicles turning from Clay onto northbound San Pablo. Let's see. So there's sharrows in the street. So without a two-way bikeway, you have two crossings of San Pablo instead of one, which to me increases the exposure and sort of decreases the, you know, the shared, sorry, this is not coming easily verbally. If you have a two-way cycle track crossing of San Pablo, then any traffic coming from either direction reinforces sort of the safety feeling of crossing San Pablo. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that the trade-offs with the two-way design here, and the suggestions have been for a two-way on the Albany Bowl development side, or there's the width issue again, and then with this particular location, if there were to be a two-way Class 4 on the Albany Bowl development side, there would be a conflict between cyclists coming from Clay turning left onto kind of contraflow San Pablo, and southbound right turning vehicles, as well as northbound left turning vehicles on San Pablo. That is an unexpected conflict. And so those conflicts would not exist with one-way design.
Okay, but there has been discussion of adding a two-way cycle track on the north side of Clay between San Pablo and Adams, and moving that conflict area out of the San Pablo area.
That is
Outside of the scope of
project is
the,
not
yeah, I
proposing any
understand.
improvements along Clay, and I think that would probably be in conjunction with private development frontage improvements that are on a different timeline, or be difficult to coordinate with our project.
I understand. I think that's all I had. Thank you for the presentation.
Nelson, Michael?
Only comments. Thank you so much. I think there are a lot of good wishes. I think the only thing that I was hoping is that in the future, when the dedicated bike lane along the San Pablo Avenue in Oakland got implemented, everyone likes it, and then people got jealous, and finally we can do better here. That's more realistic hope, I would say.
Talking like 10 years down the line.
Oh, 15.
15.
Yeah.
Just to be clear. Michael?
No.
But, you don't have any comments at this time?
Not on these specific issues. I have some more general comments.
Sure, and anything about this agenda item that is open for discussion now?
Okay, I'm just puzzled, and I have been a little out of touch in the last few weeks, but we have this Keynes-Adams pilot project already that Fareed just mentioned. And I'm just curious if the ACTC transit plan, which I think is a good one, assumes a specific outcome for that pilot project. And if it does, what was the point of the pilot project? I'm just confused about this.
I'll just say, so in coordinating this, we've worked with ACTC to leave the pilot project design under what we have implemented at the city and to await the outcome of our pilot. Our design didn't go to the crossings at Solano and Marin, so that's the one piece that, yes, it's responding to potential continuation of bike facilities that we're piloting, but it's also pedestrian safety improvements too. So we saw that as not something that, if the pilot was deemed not a success and we moved away from facilities in that fashion on Keynes and Adams, that we wouldn't have safety benefits from what's being proposed at the crossings of Solano and Marin.
I was just a little puzzled by that. You know what? I have one more question. Is that all right?
Yeah, sure. This is the time
I
for anything.
don't really understand the protocol. I think that San Pablo is a Caltrans state highway. So ultimately, Caltrans has to sign off on whatever happens. But I guess I'm trying to understand, we have, for example, in Albany, we have the Albany Transportation Commission, but we make suggestions to our city council. And then ACTC is the Alameda County Transportation Commission. If it was a parallel chain of command, they would make recommendations to the County Board of Supervisors, but it seems like the County Board of Supervisors isn't anywhere to be seen in this project. So I'm just a little unclear on sort of the hierarchy of who reports to who and who makes what decisions ultimately. And I think for San Pablo, it's ultimately Caltrans, but for the other streets, I don't know. I just find it puzzling.
Yeah, let me see if I can answer that. It is confusing to wrap your head around. So for the San Pablo Avenue portion, you're correct. Caltrans owns the right-of-way, and so they have ultimate approval authority over the design. But we did want to get some support from the city as we initiate the Caltrans process, because the city has a high level of interest in what happens along San Pablo Avenue. And of course, has land use planning authority adjacent to San Pablo, and so it gives us just a level of confidence going into the Caltrans approval process that we're on the same page with the city in terms of what the scope of the project is. And it also is just allowing us to communicate to the public how we're resolving the different input we've gotten. For the off San Pablo improvements, the city has the ultimate approval authority, and ultimately Alameda CTC will need to get encroachment permits from the city to implement projects on those streets. But similarly, this is just a good milestone for us to get approval of the concept from the city so that, again, we know that we're on the same page about what the scope of the project is.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else, Michael?
No.
Okay. So I have a general question again about the coordination between this ACTC project and the city projects. If there are things that we want to improve as the city of Albany, and we can stuff them into this design, does that give us access to funding that we wouldn't have if we just independently said we want to do an Albany project to, you know, like, to take an example, say we wanted to put four-way stop signs along Canes and do a different treatment on Stanage or something like that. Is there, what is the level of benefit that we would get by incorporating that into this design that's getting approved through ACTC, as opposed to just saying that's an Albany project that we're going to do on our own whenever we do it?
Well, in the abstract, so the broader question, I think being part of this corridor project has allowed the city to partner to get substantial funding for these safety improvements. That funding is secured and was applied for. If you're talking about new things, it would probably already be something that, if it's outside of the scope of what they have funding for, would be a separate project at this point. So I don't know that there's a big difference in our ability to secure funding for new things.
So asking for it tonight isn't really any different than saying, okay, let's go ahead with this and we'll come back and ask for it next year.
So I mean, I think it'll be Alameda CTC and looking back at their funding and their application to decide whether something is feasible to incorporate. They already have progressed a fair bit on design, so it would also potentially be that. I mean, specific to what the issue you brought up of the all-way stops, we asked them not to be considering that because we are in the middle of a pilot that was a contentious project at the city that we wanted to respect the city process that we set up for that. So while yes, by the time that their they're in the ground constructing, we should be outside of our pilot and know what we want. They're going to be beyond designing at that point, and they're going to be farther in their process.
Okay. One other detail that came up in public comment was about the leading pedestrian interval of the Solano crossing of San Pablo. Are you aware of if there have been changes to that, or if changes are proposed to that?
The changes that were recently implemented at Marin and Solano did not have any Alameda CTC involvement. We are looking at, and I didn't mention this just because there are so many different scope elements as part of the project, but we are looking at implementing leading pedestrian intervals along San Pablo Avenue at intersections where they don't already exist as part of this project.
Okay.
Caltrans did implement leading pedestrian interval, which I think was cited at Marin and San Pablo. If the speaker has observed a diminishment in that at Solano, if she could send me the details, I'll follow up with Caltrans. I don't think that would have been the intent of what the changes they made.
Okay. Yeah, I don't have any personal awareness of this. I was just trying to make sure the public comment was followed up. Thanks. Okay, so let me go through some of my notes here. At Keynes and Marin, definitely appreciate the upgrade to the Hawk signal. I think that changes the outlook for that intersection significantly and really makes it possible for us to consider a future Albany project to remove those bulb outs and widen that to a 4-lane crossing. I don't think we would have wanted to do that without substantial protection for the pedestrians doing the crossing. And now with the Hawk signal, I think we may feel much more confident widening that from 3 lanes to 4. So I definitely want to make sure that whatever we do here doesn't make it harder to turn that into a 4-lane roadway in the future. And the suggestions that were made sound like good ones. I also heard a suggestion from somebody to change the traffic flow at that intersection so that westbound cars approaching Keynes could turn right onto Keynes, and that would provide a better traffic flow for access to the YMCA if people lived to the east of the YMCA and wanted to approach from the east. They could drive west on Marin, turn right on Keynes, do what they are going to do at the Y, continue north, and turn right on Solano at the end. And it seems like that's an easier traffic flow than having people have to go to Solano and approach from that side and then turn around on Keynes if they want to. So I don't know if that has to be part of this plan, but again, if there's anything in this plan that would make it difficult to implement that right turn movement in the future, I'd want to make sure we keep that possibility open. Do you see any connection between what I just described and anything that you're proposing at that intersection?
I think it relates more to the city's just one-way circulation pilot.
Okay, so that can just be a city decision separate from this process. Okay. Regarding the Washington crossing, yeah, I mean, I have to agree with some of the observations we've heard that the goal isn't to make perfect bike-friendly crossing for everybody. The goal is to make it commensurate with the experience of riding on Washington. And I think as long as we achieve what we talked about with the only cars being on San Pablo during that crossing phase being the ones that came from Washington to begin with, then the amount that these bike riders have to mingle with cars during their adventure is theoretically no different than what they've been doing as they've been riding on Washington anyway. So I wish that we could be a little more assertive about talking about removing parking for that short block to facilitate an east side two-way cycle track, if that were technically possible. It sounds like there are some other technical problems that make that difficult, even if we did decide to remove the parking. But if Oakland is going as far as to remove all of the parking on San Pablo for miles, it seems like we should be ready to talk about removing 5 or 6 parking spaces on one short section. And there must be strategies that this project is using to manage the effects of that parking removal. I mean, there must be businesses on San Pablo and Oakland that are going to be negatively affected by removing their parking, but the community has come together and decided to do it. And I believe that the project incorporates some kind of mitigation or management or something to help the businesses and help the people in their cars find a place to park so that they can still use those businesses. And I don't know, can you say a few words about that and how that might apply to Albany if we were to try to do that in a short section like this?
Yeah, Colin, I'll let you chime in as well. I mean, we're actively looking at sort of parking and loading solutions for the southern section of San Pablo corridor. Some of the strategies we're looking at have benefit at a larger scale than just one block, like residential parking permit programs. Colin, I don't know if you want to add anything.
This is good. I was feeling left out. So we've done a whole bunch of outreach with businesses in Oakland, Emeryville, and the South Berkeley portion to basically identify what their needs, especially for loading, are. And we're basically relying on primarily off San Pablo, either off-street lots where those exist, which that isn't applicable for this little stretch of businesses, or side streets. So looking at different strategies for the stretch of curb that's next to the commercial use on side streets, for things like moving loading zones, blue zones, potentially metering, so different or short turnover time limits. So we haven't identified exactly what we're doing in all of those locations, and that'll all be part of outreach that happens this fall. But there are a set of strategies that we're considering for each of those blocks that will be back out and going door to door on that. And then there also are locations where there are businesses that are mid-block that don't really they're far from a side street, and we are actually proposing some mid-block loading zones where buses and bikes will have to do some mixing as one of the trade-offs of the project.
Yeah, and actually the loading zone designs we're looking at really only work with a bus lane present as well, so.
Yeah, I mean, my brief observation of that location in the middle of the day, yesterday actually, so like mid-afternoon on a weekday, is that yes, some of the parking spaces along San Pablo were heavily used. The time-limited parking spaces along San Pablo were not heavily used, interestingly, although you would think with the laundromat there might be some need for that, but that didn't seem to be what people were doing. And the spaces along Washington that were kind of contiguous with this along the north side of the east leg of Washington, so no left turns or street crossings required, were almost completely unused. So it seems to me that when we're ready to talk about removing parking on San Pablo, there are opportunities here, and I think it'll be interesting to learn from what you guys do in Oakland. And sort of following up on what Nelson said, that we need to raise our level of ambition in the long run. This 2023 might or might not be the time to do it, but there's a lot of unused parking in the city, and we need to find ways to take better advantage of it so we aren't quite so constrained. I guess I'll stop talking about that issue now. We didn't talk about the existing hawk signal at Dartmouth. I know we've had some concerns that it's a great signal for people walking across San Pablo. It's not so great for people biking at the moment because if you're biking westbound, it's a little bit hard to get to the push button and things like that. So has there been any talk about putting that kind of improvement into this project?
Yeah, and I didn't focus on it in the presentation. In some of the other materials that were in the packet, there was some information on that crossing. But at San Pablo and Dartmouth, we are looking at adding bike detection as part of the crossing there, so bicyclists can more easily use the hawk signal.
Okay. We've had some requests from various people to change the signage on the hawk signal so that it speaks more directly to drivers who may not understand how a hawk signal works. Has there been any prospect of doing that in this project?
I've communicated that in our design review, so they know that we've had that request with Caltrans, and when they go through the Caltrans process, we'll try again on that.
Okay. All right, so all of these have been in the mix, even though we didn't talk about them tonight. I'm glad to hear that. Okay, I think that's the end of my comments.
I think Ryan had his hand up.
Oh.
Did you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify for the Dartmouth, actually something that we also are including is trying to add some bicycle crossing improvements too. So not just looking at how to detect it better, but actually better facilitate the crossing. So that is included in the safety enhancements project.
Okay, great. Go ahead.
Were you done?
Yeah.
Okay. So I guess as I sit here thinking about Washington, the Washington crossing of San Pablo, you know, we have the Dartmouth crossing in the southern end of the city. We're talking about some good improvements, could be better, but good improvements at Brighton. And like I said, I'm going to pick, I'm sorry. But this is a central area, and it's really a high demand kind of crossing. And we got that letter from the school district, or one commenter tonight brought it up. If we're trying to provide a central area for all ages and ability to cross San Pablo on, you know, with personal human-powered transportation, is this the best we can do? And to that, it seems to fall a bit short. So just throw that out there.
I'll kind of weigh in on that too, and I think we're sort of stuck, right? The last time we had public hearings and discussions about this, the decision was move away from a two-way cycle track on the east side because of impact to parking and sidewalk and all. Try it on the west side. Of course, you put it on the west side, it's like mostly driveway, which is not low stress. So I think as I mentioned before, this feels like a medium stress solution, but it's a medium stress node in a medium stress bikeway. And that's the one thing that makes me kind of okay with it. Until we're ready to improve the bikeway connecting to it, there's not a lot of point of making a really super low stress crossing. There's some point. I don't mean to be dismissive of it, but it feels like how much are we willing to pursue a really low stress crossing if it's still in the middle of a medium stress route? Normally where I get really worried is you got a low stress route and then a really high stress crossing. That's a break in the link and you got to fix it. And I think right now the crossing is higher stress than the route leading to it, and this project will fix it. It'll match them. It's not going to go over and above, but at least it'll make it relatively consistent. So I think as a goal, it's a reasonable goal. Could we strive for more? Yes, but I think until we are ready to deal with the route, I don't see the big picture benefit to it. Everything's incremental, right? So make this great now and come back and fix the route later, I don't know, maybe. But I'll leave it there. I do think overall, a lot of good stuff here. I appreciate that the presentation really acknowledges a lot of the public process that has happened within the city and within the project leading to this recommendation. And so it's really hard for me to find fault with anything that's recommended. I think that staff has heard and is aware of some of the areas that we would like to look for tweaks in the final design that will facilitate future things that we want to do. But I think that's fully within the recommendation that's before us to consider here of work with staff during design. You can get the signal poles in the right place, and if we're going to change a street from one-way to two-way, that's not going to be a fatal flaw to your design, but you can accommodate it as you're proceeding. So, I mean, I'd be perfectly happy to move the recommendation that's before us and recognize that staff has heard all the things that we are hoping to incorporate into this.
One more comment. I think we have been talking about, definitely we want to do more and do less. I just want to put one recommendation over there. I like the idea, I can't remember who said we do a test. Can we just, engineering doesn't know the truth. Otherwise they will be called scientists, right? So when they say the minimum width is at A, and now we're trying to do 10, I don't believe that. I mean, maybe what we can, by the way, I work for engineering firms, so no offense. I think we can do a test and just basically on the east side of that segment between the jogged Washington, and put it there, just let them, paint it for 2 weeks, saying, yeah, use it. Use the sidewalk for your bike. See what will happen. Now, talk to the retailer and saying, we're going to test it. See how it comes. It might work. I want to throw that idea out there.
Yeah. I don't want to discount what you're saying, that's a reasonable thing to test. But I will say that my idea of a demonstration was more about the center lane and how much that might get used, how much that might be comfortable to people.
I think it would be great to demonstrate both of those.
Yeah.
So we know what we're.
See which side got used more. I mean, right?
Yeah, and for me, the purpose of demonstrating the proposal with the crossing in the street is to see if it really feels low stress. I mean, the vision that is being put before us is this will be a San Pablo Ave that's not the San Pablo Ave we're used to with cars zooming by. This will be a San Pablo Ave that's quiet, that feels more like Washington. It's wide, it's a big amount of asphalt, but
it's like a temporary park block.
The kind of traffic on, yeah, it's more like, that's why I brought up Sunday streets. I mean, people will happily ride their bikes on a street like San Pablo Avenue during Sunday streets, because that's what the street is set up for at that time. And I would hope, and my most optimistic hope is that with this signal phasing, that's what this little stretch of San Pablo will feel like for that period of time. And if that's true, I think we can build a lot more confidence about more levels of cyclists being willing to use the crossing. But it's very hard I think it's hard for a lot of people to trust that without seeing it. On the other hand, I think the demonstration that you're proposing serves a different purpose, which is to see if the dimensions work out, to see if we can actually build something that will work without moving the curb, to see if really is the only constraint to building that two-way cycle track on the east side just that we don't want to remove all those parking spaces, and that's a political question? Or is there another constraint that's a technical one, that there just isn't room, and regardless of our opinions and who gives the loudest public comment, we just can't do it? And I would like to have a clearer answer to that question. So I do think both of those demonstration ideas have a lot of value.
So I guess the question about doing a demonstration of the bike lane or cycle track with, if there's a two-way cycle track on the east side and we say, hey, we're going to relitigate the parking loss question with the public and assume everything turns out favorable to remove all the parking there and move it around the corner or whatever. 8-foot parking lane is all we've got right now, unless we're willing to cut into the sidewalk, which is outside the project scope. If you want to do an 8-foot parking lane into a two-way cycle track and have a buffer so that the northbound bikes facing, or well, southbound bikes facing northbound buses in the adjacent lane, 1-foot buffer is not enough. I think a 2-foot concrete buffer is going to still feel kind of frightening, frankly. So now you got 2 3-foot bike lanes, 3-foot wide bike lanes. I don't know how wide your handlebars are, but at some point, you're just too squeezed. And I don't know that I've ever heard of a, actually really considered bike lane that's less than 4 feet. So, not saying we can't explore that sort of thing, but all the standards are pushing towards more space with, bigger bikes and, kids who aren't maybe quite so stable yet. And maybe I'd rather have them on the sidewalk than in a super skinny cycle track. I don't know. I think it's fine to look at doing pilots. I'm a little unsure where we'd end up with this unless we're willing to move the sidewalk.
Just to clarify, my suggestion of doing a demonstration is on the sidewalk. Okay. So you don't have to argue with the retailer saying, we're going to move the parking in front of you. We don't have to, know. Yeah, so the least political obstacle possible. And let people, compromise and negotiate the space while they're using it, right? Right now, I imagine it's like 13 foot, maybe 15 foot of the sidewalk. We can share it.
So how would the demonstration you're proposing be different from the status quo the way it is today?
Well, you give people a clear signal. It's okay to bike them there for that short segment. That's the differences. Because right now you're gonna just, okay, nobody's here, I'm gonna use it, right?
And are you thinking about that as a way to propose a future solution that involves putting the bikes where the sidewalk is today, or one that involves removing parking? What's the vision that you're trying to?
Well, if I tell you that my future intention is to gather enough political momentum to move the parking, I won't say it now, right?
You just did.
You'll say it to me privately, but nobody can hear you.
It's not the most highly attended meeting. Well, what if you put a southbound cycle track in the parking lane and took part of the sidewalk for the northbound cycle track lane?
So you're suggesting we actually prohibit parking for the duration of the demonstration?
I'm talking about a concept. I'm not talking about a demonstration at this point.
Oh, okay.
I'm saying, could you conceptually?
As an actual solution?
Yeah.
Have a two-way cycle track with the
Split.
southbound part where there now is car parking and the northbound part where there now is sidewalk.
Yes. Painted in some different way.
Yeah.
Well, I'll just kind of chime in. I think it's a really interesting conversation, and I'm just going to say process-wise, the meeting at which we discussed that was way better attended than this. If we try to propose a change now without people noticed that that was really on the table for consideration, I think we'll be not really being fair to the public process or fair to the public. If we want to do that, I think we should carve that out separately and notice it and discuss it with all the public coming back in and saying all the things they told us before. I don't feel comfortable voting on a change to that concept, given that people felt it was settled. To reopen it now without that public notice doesn't seem appropriate. I also want to note that Michael's got his hand up.
Can I speak? Good time for me to talk?
Yes.
Yeah, I would second what Fareed says. I think we're talking about changes at this point that would require public notification. But I'm also leery of even going down this path because ultimately I think this is up to Caltrans, and I'm not sure Caltrans is going to be on board with any of this. don't have a sense for how much you can push Caltrans. My sense is I wouldn't want to burn up huge amounts of political capital on this particular issue. So I would hate to go down a dead-end path without getting some confirmation that what we're talking about is even in the feasible set of options that Caltrans is willing to consider.
And some of
That's
the-
my point, thanks.
Can some of the staff address that? Like, is this something that would need Caltrans approval, or is this an Albany question?
This,
Any design along St. Pablo Avenue would need Caltrans approval.
Even if it's just affecting the parking lane and the sidewalk? Okay.
Yeah, their right-of-way extends that way.
Well, let me put the question a different way then. If we approve the design that's proposed here, and then we want to continue a discussion in Albany with proper noticing and everything to think about doing this two-way cycle track on the east side, what obstacles are we creating for ourselves? What can we do to keep the door open?
I guess I would say the improvements that are proposed tonight, the signalization of the east leg, and then the signal phasing to cross bikes where they're mixed with the Washington traffic, wouldn't preclude future pilots and future revisiting a protected bike lane on one side of the street. And even if the city elected to go that route down the line, the signal still has benefits just for overall safety and ability to make turns out of side streets.
So putting that additional signal on the east leg of Washington is not a total waste of effort if we end up installing this other solution in a few years or whenever we do it.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the signal benefits pedestrians, which was where we first started talking about it, as well as cars. And in this context, some benefit for bikes, but we can look at an alternative benefit for bikes in the future. This doesn't sound like it precludes it, so I think that's good. This opens the conversation more while giving us at least some interim improvements for bikes.
Okay. So we had the beginnings of a motion. Before we proceed with the motion, does anybody else have any further comments? Michael?
No.
All right. It sounded like you said something that could have been a motion, but could you say it again now?
Yeah, and just maybe I'll add a little bit of language to what's in the staff report or the agenda here, which is to say that part 2 of the recommendation talks about directing city staff to work with ACTC on final design and implementation. And the clarification that I want to add is that we intend for that design work to include looking at such things as signal pole placement to allow for future modifications at the Marin and Keynes intersection and other locations that we've discussed. So I guess then the motion is recommend that the City Council, 1, approve the conceptual design for the San Pablo Avenue Multimodal Corridor Program, safety enhancement, and parallel bike improvements within the City of Albany, and 2, direct city staff to work with the Alameda County Transportation Commission on final design and implementation of these projects, including coordination of potential future city projects.
I second that.
Okay. Any further discussion before we take a vote? We have a roll call.
Commissioner Barnes,
Aye.
Commissioner Javindel,
Aye.
Commissioner McCroskey,
Aye.
Commissioner Pang,
Yes.
Chair Chomsky.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you.
Want to thank the commission very much for the thoughtful discussion and all the great questions and suggestions, and just for the opportunity to be here tonight.
Thank you for this really great project and a really great presentation of it. Appreciate your work. Okay. We go till 9:30 unless we extend. All right, I think we can tackle 5-2, which is update to guidelines for restricting street parking near intersections.
Thank you, Chair Chomsky. So this item is looking at the city's guidelines for restricting street parking near intersections. One note on the language on the title. I did find in the minutes from 2017, which isn't reflected in the current, but could be considered, since this was direction from the commission previously, to specify that it's unsignalized intersections. So if you want to make that tweak, I did stumble across that. So briefly as background, typical national guidance on this is restricting 20 to 25 feet of curb from marked or unmarked crosswalks. The California Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices doesn't specify for general parking, but does call for a 20-foot minimum no parking zone if parking spaces are marked. So where we actually mark individual spaces, that's the guidance. Other red curb applications at intersections exist and are related to infrastructure access. They're implemented under the City Engineer Authority for storm drain access or other parking regulations like no parking near fire hydrants. The 2017 resolution and guidance distinguishes, in the city guidance, distinguishes between the approach and departure sides of an intersection, identifying preferred distances of 20 and 10 feet respectively, with flexibility to reduce further if determined to accommodate a vehicle parking space, and to increase further if the remaining curb length to a driveway does not accommodate a vehicle parking space, to clarify where parking spaces are allowed. As I understand it, the greater length of parking restriction on the approach side addressed the increased vulnerability there due to the closer proximity of an approaching vehicle to the crosswalk approach from that direction. And the policy also identifies that intersections with geometry or topography constraints are to be analyzed individually for visibility treatment. The resolution and the guidelines also details a process. It provides a prioritization criteria for where to start with implementation. Proposals for each intersection are then to be reviewed by the commission at a meeting notice to owners and occupants within 150 feet walking distance. And after that, the city engineer makes a final determination and implementation on to proceed. Implementation of this guidance to date has been accomplished in one of two ways: through city projects that involve engineered plans and through standalone implementation following the established prioritization. These standalone projects have typically involved preparation of visuals to communicate the proposed change and time at this body to review and discuss those. Residents have often had an expectation that the proposal is flexible and can be approved or denied. Over the time since the guidance was established, the commission, though, has consistently upheld the guidelines prioritization of pedestrian safety through implementation of these parking restrictions over the impacts on access and vehicle parking. So the proposed change keeps the same requirements in terms of the curb length, with the same flexibility in application of those to accommodate a vehicle parking space where small adjustments in the length can be made, while clarifying the process and changing the process and implementation. It changes the language from guidelines with proposed requirements to a council policy that details the application of intersection parking restrictions. It removes the prioritization criteria in commission review, placing implementation under the city engineer's municipal code authorization to restrict parking at hazardous areas. And it changes the public notification of meeting to review the proposal of a meeting to review the proposal to a public notice of the change before it's implemented. This is intended to clarify that the policy is intended to be implemented citywide and makes changes to the process to reflect that. This change would allow for much quicker implementation of the safety measure, as we've been able to do to date, making it feasible to incorporate into broader roadway maintenance, such as pavement resurfacing and striping projects. And with that, staff's recommending that the commission recommend to City Council approval of the proposed council policy for restricting street parking near intersections, and I'm happy to answer questions on that.
Any questions from commissioners?
So after notification, is there an appeal process?
Not as proposed. It would be city engineer's decision to implement and notification to the public before a change is made.
So then it kind of gets covered under the standard complaint of the city council? General? Okay.
Yeah. If someone wanted to disagree with the implementation of the policy, that would be taking it to council.
Okay.
So I guess a question to follow up on that is if the public notice defines a comment period, then that's time within which they could appeal directly to the city engineer to refine the design. I don't know if that's built into it now or if there's really interest in doing that. Obviously, as an engineer, I want to make sure that I'm hearing all the concerns before I make a final decision. If you want to do that, put a timeline on it that would say, yeah, the city engineer will entertain any comments received within some time frame, and then their decision will be final, and they'll go ahead and do whatever it's going to be. If there's any big changes, it might involve renoticing, which is, it's more work. But anyway, I guess I'm starting to veer into making a comment, but the question is just whether there's interest in providing that flexibility for the public to comment to the city engineer before they make their decision.
Yeah, I guess I would add to that and ask if there are other processes that are similar that we already have that have a set process.
Yeah, so the idea here is whether the commission and council is comfortable with us implementing the policy without going into detailed design discussion for each intersection. So if a notice went out, the idea was it would be part of a maintenance project or construction was going to happen kind of notice, and that we would be implementing the policy. It wouldn't be providing a detailed design for someone to comment on. So that would, I guess, just be the further detail on how we would envision the change.
Interesting. We tend to get some rather spirited responses. And I'm not saying that I want those to keep coming here necessarily, but it seems like maybe there should be some.
Let's focus on questions.
Yeah,
for the
questions,
moment.
right.
No, I know.
Michael, any questions before we go to comment?
No, I have comments, but I'll hold off.
Okay. I guess maybe I lost track a little bit. There was a suggestion that people who receive the notice and don't like it can do one of two things: talk to city staff to try to voice their concerns, or go to a city council meeting to try to voice their concerns. Now, if they want to go to a city council meeting, that won't necessarily happen within the 10 days, right? I mean, if they get notice that this is going to happen in 11 days, there may not be a council meeting during that period. Or are we talking about them going to council to object after the paint is applied? Is that what's on the table? Okay, I guess I'll save that for discussion later. And is there a pathway for people to talk directly to city staff right away after they get the notice? I'm just trying to understand if people are encouraged. If you have concerns about this, call, Jeff's personal cell phones at 3 a.m. to yell at him about it. What are people advised to do?
Meeting notices that we currently do provide staff contact information. Construction notices, or that version provides a project manager or engineer contact information.
Okay. So those instructions are on the notice.
To be clear, the notices are often postcards, and you're saying that the policy is going to be referenced, but there won't be a plan to show how it's going to be implemented, which wouldn't fit on the postcard. So
the proposed change would identify that intersection, restricting parking at intersections pursuant to the policy is proposed at the location as part of whatever project is. So it would identify the change, it would notify them that the change is happening. But what, I guess, take a step back, if there is discomfort in that change, we can continue as the process as we currently have. What I think we have gotten bogged down is if there are clear, I mean, it says it's guidelines, but then that says there's requirements that are pretty prescriptive. And if the implementation at the commission has been pretty prescriptive of those and following those, are we spending a lot of commission time and giving residents the idea that this is up for debate when our implementation and the policy direction is that the safety overrides those concerns that they voiced? And if that's the case, is there a process where we're notifying, but that the decision has been made that we're implementing this for safety? If it's not the case, then maybe it's just tweaks to clarify what is up for discussion at the commission, so we're not set up for continuing to have the same conversation at this body. That was the intention of, one, could we deliver the safety improvement faster by not having to go intersection by intersection design, which limits how quickly we can implement the policy? And two, can we respond to the direction that from this body that has reinforced the council policy that it's pretty clear what we want to be installing at the intersections?
thank you. Yeah.
Any more questions before we move on to comment? Okay, is there any public comment on this?
I don't see any hands raised right now.
Discussion. Michael, it sounded like you had some thoughts.
Or, my main feeling is it's just paint. I think this is a very straightforward safety improvement. I think you want to be able to schedule these and, bang them out. For example, I'm not aware of us, someone can correct me if I'm wrong, we've been doing a lot of sidewalk grinding, including on my street. I don't recall there being any appeals process to when or where or how much your sidewalks get ground up. It's pretty cut and dried stuff. And again, it's only paint. So I'd say, let's go for it. Let's get all this stuff painted. And if somehow there's a community uproar and people are having to check their torches and pitchforks at the door, well, we can just paint over them. But I think we should just go ahead and expedite this. That's my 2 cents worth.
So I'll comment that I think that part of what I heard from staff was setting public expectations. And our current process doesn't really seem to quite hit the expectation that we will make this change. And all the discussions have been, plus or minus a couple feet, right? So if we're noticing that this is the policy and these are the ranges that are provided by the policy, and the city engineer will, do whatever within that range that preserves parking where feasible, that's a really clear message. We're going to do it. And we're going to preserve your parking if it's feasible within these parameters. And beyond that, no, we're not going to put back that one parking space at the corner because it violates our safety goals. So I kind of like that aspect of it. As much as I like, to give people a chance to engage, if we're going to call this a policy and be serious about doing it, let's do it. Let's make it clear. Here's the parameters, and we will preserve as much as we can. So we're not just willy-nilly trying to get rid of all the parking. We're providing clear sight lines. And if we can convey that message, that's not a bad way to go. It will free up staff time, get stuff done sooner, and we can move on to bigger policy issues that are perhaps a better use of everyone's time and not give the community a feeling that they have to fight for every single parking space if it's a decision that the city council has already made as a citywide policy.
Any other?
Let's get it done.
Can I try for a motion?
But let me say a few words first.
Please.
So someone brought up, I think, Michael, the idea that if this gets painted and there's a real need to have a public discussion about it, that we could paint over it. Is that realistic? That if there was actually a reason to revert this, we could revert it in an individual case?
Yes, it is just paint. I think if it's within the guidance, as Fareed was saying, Commissioner Javida was saying, if our determination that, there's within the 3 to 10 foot range on the departure, and we said 7 feet is what should be here, and someone, came back and said that 1 foot difference is making the difference, if it was within the parameters, I think we could go back and adjust to reduce the red curb from the 7 feet to 6 feet to adjust to feedback at that point.
That would be a staff action, but is it also possible, in theory, to have an agendized item on commission to say, in this case, we're going to violate the policy, and to have that discussion after the paint has already gone in? I'm not saying we would ever do that, but is it a hypothetical possibility?
Yeah, I mean, the either in the form of revisiting the policy, if there were, or if there was something specific at a location that rose to the situation that it wasn't standard that we needed to revisit with the commission, we could do that.
Okay. I guess for me, what it comes down to is, can we imagine any circumstance where we as a commission would say, well, yeah, the policy was good in general, but at this particular intersection, for reasons that have been brought up in public comment or by, whatever mechanism, we agree that it's better to allow the parking and have the pedestrians view the sight lines be obstructed as people are crossing the street. I just can't see any circumstance where I personally would be likely to say that. And I don't think anyone else on the commission can really imagine it either. It's like no matter how bad the parking demand crunch is, the solution is not going to be to endanger pedestrians. The solution is going to be something about parking management. So I guess for me, that's the litmus test, that if I can't even imagine a situation where we as a commission would make a different decision, then it's not a good use of our time. So I've had my say, and I'm ready for a motion unless anybody else wants to comment.
After many years of implementing this policy, the Transportation Commission agrees with staff that it is more straightforward and recommends to the City Council that this policy be implemented by staff.
Is that suitable for the kind of motion you're looking for here? Okay.
Yep.
Do we
We're
have a
looking for a
second?
recommendation to council.
Second that.
Paying seconds. Okay.
Let's have a roll call.
Commissioner Barnes,
Okay.
Commissioner Javindal,
Aye.
Commissioner McCroskey,
Aye.
Commissioner Peng,
Yes.
Chair Chomsky.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Carries. Okay. So we did not get to 5-3 at the last meeting because it was very late. I am inclined to extend a little bit tonight so that we can cover it if folks are up for that.
I move that we extend the meeting until 10 o'clock if necessary.
I'll second that.
Let's just have a voice vote. All in favor? Yes.
Aye.
Aye.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I need to go
Yes.
lie down. I'm kind of time limited to how much I can sit, so I'm gonna have to call it a night. I'm sorry.
Is there a mechanism for Michael to exit the meeting and we continue without him?
Can, yeah.
Is that, okay.
What-
Just so you know, this is mostly an informational item. I don't think we're going to be called on to make motions or vote on anything. So it's a good opportunity for you to take a rest and come back and watch it on the video later.
Okay, great. Thank you for your understanding.
Michael, I want to say, oops, he's gone. Well, he might watch the tape later, so I want to say we're really glad you could participate, and we wish you, I think I speak for all when I say we wish you speedy healing.
We wouldn't be insulted if you continue the item to next month if you wanted, but we are available to continue.
I think the likelihood of us fitting this in before 9:30 in any meeting in the future is fairly low. So since it's not too late tonight, let's do it.
Sounds good.
Will do. Right. There it goes. Okay, hello, commissioners. I'll be giving a relatively quick report tonight, summarizing some of the transportation-specific items from our Climate Action and Adaptation Plan Key Performance Indicator Report. This is a report that we do every year that includes a greenhouse gas emissions inventory as well as a variety of other items related to our CAP metrics and goals, tracking kind of how we're doing on various fronts. And so I'll start off with the kind of overall greenhouse gas emissions inventory. The most recent one is for 2021, since the data does lag a bit. But as you'll see in the very large orange section of the circle there, transportation makes up nearly half of the greenhouse gas emissions in the city. And that's true pretty much every single year. It varies a bit year to year, but it's generally about half. And then shortly behind transportation is natural gas use in residential and non-residential buildings. Those two together make up most of the emissions in the city. Our 2021 citywide emissions total was about 50,000 metric tons of CO2, or about 2.5 tons per capita. There goes a little bit of a lag. So for transportation, the main way that we are actually estimating the greenhouse gas emissions inventory is by looking at the VMT, or vehicle miles traveled, and then also looking at an emissions factor for the emissions per mile on average throughout the city. these are all modeled to various extents, as you would imagine. But we do have some pretty good data about these things. VMT is a pretty interesting one. This chart here shows the change in VMT per person per day over the years. As you can see, it was around 12 back in 2010, and in 2021, it was closer to 9. There's obviously a big shift happening in 2020 there. It was a bit of an unusual year, you probably remember. So I think we can expect the VMT for 2022 to continue rising to a more kind of normal level. But in general, there has been a downward trend over time. I'll also note that there's a change in color on this graph, and that's to represent a shift in our data source. The blue section of the graph is data that's coming from the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, or MTC. And then starting in 2018, the data shifts to Google Environmental Insights Explorer data. And this is largely due to the fact that the MTC data pretty much stops in 2020, and they didn't really know how to adjust their modeling for it. Google data is based on maps usage and information gathered from people's phones, so it's a bit more data specific and less modeling heavy, which is pretty useful, especially considering our circumstances for the last few years. But yeah, so overall we've seen a downward trend in VMT, which is great. And that's reflected in our overall transportation emissions in the last couple of decades. As you can see, there's generally that same downward trend with a big jump downwards in 2020. It's kind of moving back into the normal trend line we had seen before. And then the chart on the right here shows those two factors when we think about the overall emissions. There's the vehicle miles traveled, and then there's emissions per mile. And as you can see, they're both moving downwards. So our cars are getting cleaner. We're seeing a lot, cars that have the higher emissions standards and people driving newer cars, and then also a move towards electric vehicles, which I'll talk about more in a moment. And then we're also seeing that shift in the vehicle miles traveled. Obviously, 2020 makes the chart look a bit odd, but you can see that generally speaking, the reduction in overall transportation emissions is more so due to people driving less than people driving cleaner cars. And that's generally what we've been striving for as a city and within our cap, so it's good to see that as well. Public transit has hit some hard times in the last few years, as I think we all know. These two charts show ridership for BART and for ACT. AC Transit, I wrote ACT Transit there, oops. But on the BART side, so this shows a percentage of the February 2020 level. So in March of 2020, it dropped by 95%. So you can see it starts at about 5% there. So just, almost no one was riding BART. And it's slowly and surely moved back towards its original ridership levels, but it's still, only at about 40–45% of where it was before the pandemic. So still just under half of its total ridership. And you can see that there's these swings that are actually often correlated with spikes in the pandemic as well. And then with AC Transit, a pretty similar picture. You can see that there's a huge drop in 2020. The data is a little bit less specific. It's not monthly, so you can't see it quite as clearly. But similarly, a big drop with an increase, but not nearly towards its original levels. When we look at vehicles within the city, our vehicles per capita number has been dropping pretty significantly and steadily over the past 5 or 6 years. There's been some market shifts, so that's kind of part of the bumpiness here, but if you discount 2020, there's kind of a general trend you can see that we're actually below 0.5 cars per person now, which is pretty impressive, and well ahead of the state and county. In terms of electric vehicles, a similar picture. Electric vehicles now make up almost 9% of the vehicle population in Albany, which is really impressive to see. And as you can tell in the chart, it's just been kind of exponentially rising for the past few years. And again, ahead of the state and county levels as well. Percent of purchases is a little bit more in line with the state and county also. And you can see it's really taken a big shift in 2020, all throughout California actually, that it kind of just suddenly became a normal thing in a way, going from 10, 15% to now 25% last year of new purchases being electric vehicles. And then a few other miscellaneous things that we track. So this is, the chart on the left here is from the census data, residents who commute by alternative modes. So this is anything other than driving alone. This is carpool and biking and walking and working from home and public transit, all those things. And there has been a shift upwards in recent years. There is, in 2020, a lot of people working from home, inflating those numbers a little bit. But again, when you don't look at 2020 so closely, you can see that general trend line. And then there's also Walk Score and All Transit Score. These are private companies that do kind of modeling for walking accessibility and transit accessibility. Walk Score is out of 100 and All Transit Score is out of 10. So you can see a pretty similar score on both of those that's fairly high as well. And these have been going up slightly in the past few years, although they don't change very much over time. And that is all of our transit data. There's lots more non-transit related data in the overall CAP report, and I'll be posting that online on our climate action and adaptation page soon, so you can look into that if you're interested as well. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you. Questions from the commission?
How much would transportation need to be reduced in order to meet our goals for climate action?
That's a very good question. I don't have the number off the top of my head. I think a very significant amount. It looks like Justin might be looking up the numbers right now. I think a big part of the goal is to get that emissions factor down very, very, very low. So getting almost everyone into electric vehicles, that's one of our goals. And then obviously bringing down the vehicle mile travel as well. But yeah, if you can shift all the cars to be electric, then the emissions piece of it can drop very significantly, even if you still have people doing a lot of driving. Although it's complicated.
It is complicated,
Yeah.
and I checked out your presentation to the Climate Action Committee, and I think you mentioned or featured that our climate action goals are based on consumption in Albany, but not product cycle. So, that's an issue as well when you're talking about a shift to electric vehicles versus a shift away from vehicles.
Yeah, that's one piece of the larger presentation, is that there's consumption-based emissions, and then there's also kind of sort of usage-based emissions. I'm not thinking of the right term for it right now, but basically the difference between the fossil fuels that we burn here within the city limits, and then there's the fossil fuels that are burned in the process of making my mug that I buy. That's counted as an emission somewhere else in the world, but it could be counted as an emission here if you use that model. And so if you look at the consumption-based emissions for the city of Albany, it's much, much higher if you count all of the things that we're using that were produced elsewhere. And so that really changes the picture a lot, but that's something that we can't really track on an annual basis. So the goals are not as specific when we get into that piece of things, if that makes sense.
Yes, but it does change how we think about what
Yes.
we want to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's part of our thinking, even though it's not necessarily part of the numbers that we're always looking at. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Questions in parentheses. Big
Just
quotes,
to-
yeah.
I can answer, I think, part of what you were asking. In the plan, it calls for by 2045, a 25% reduction in miles traveled by passenger vehicles, 98% of passenger vehicles being electric, and 90% of commercial vehicles being electric. So that was the numbers put in the plan.
Thank
Do
you,
the
Justin.
current trends support that goal or support the achieving of that goal?
Yes. It's, it's not like a linear thing necessarily. If you look at, I have another chart that shows kind of an example of the overall greenhouse gas emission goals and then where we're tracking along that. And we are a little bit ahead of the goal if you just look at it in that linear track. But if you look at something like the electric vehicles, we're at 9% right now. That's not that high, but it is also the kind of thing that increases exponentially over time. So it's a little bit hard to determine how close you are to being on track of that. With our VMT goals, we are declining pretty steadily in a linear fashion. I could kind of try to work some things out about how close we are to getting down 25%, but generally we're pretty close to on track with most of these types of goals.
So you may have explained it and I may have missed it, but can you explain what the VMT is actually measuring? Is
Yeah.
people who live in Albany who drive their cars to Santa Rosa, or is it people who live in Santa Rosa and drive their cars in Albany, or both?
Yeah, excellent question. So the kind of standard way that the VMT is modeled is that for trips that are taking place entirely within the city of Albany, Albany gets 100% of those miles. And for trips that are taking place, that are either starting in Albany or ending in Albany, Albany gets 50% of those miles. If a trip goes through Albany but doesn't stop, then we get none of those miles.
Okay, that's really clear. Thanks. Any other questions? Any public comment? Is there anybody still listening?
We've got one member, but I don't see a hand raised.
Discussion? Any other thoughts?
I'm just going to comment. I think it's really great information. Thank you for providing that. And the explanation you just provided kind of addressed the question I was going to ask about whether we get dinged for trips on the freeway. It sounds like we don't.
Not unless someone's stopping in the middle of the freeway.
Well, hopefully not. No, that's great.
But we who live in Albany get dinged for our trips
it's
on freeways in Los Angeles too, or to Los Angeles.
Yeah, if you go right there, yeah.
end up there. But to Ken's point, the VMT has independent utility to us. Even if we went to 100% electric vehicles, reducing the number of trips is helping us. Maybe it's not a climate thing specifically, except in the production cycle, but it is better for our safety, quality of life, et cetera. So the point I'm making is that active transportation remains an important component of this for health and wellness and so forth. So anyway, I think it's great, and I'm glad that we're tracking all the components of it. It really tells a much more robust picture. So I appreciate that.
I just want to second that because I think in the planning and in the overall discussion, because all the capitals and all the interest goes to like electric car makers, people who really working really hard to convert people to active transportation, helping build bike lanes, or marginalized because there's just no capital behind it. So it's very important that our Transportation Commission to stay on alert on that front. So let's keep working on that.
Yeah, thank you for this. And I would further add that, you know, especially in thinking of the sort of life cycle costs and societal effects, Steve Price, who is with El Cerrito Strollers and Rollers, wrote an article about how electric bikes use far fewer battery cells and present a much cleaner life cycle. So when we're thinking about that total effect, it's a completely different picture.
Compared to electric cars, you mean?
Thank you. Compared to electric cars, which are much heavier and expensive to build and require much larger batteries.
More mining.
Yes, and there is an international equity issue, I think you could say, and issues with the cleanliness of the products that go into it.
I would add that my son pointed out the other day that the pavement in the bike lanes seems to last a lot longer than the pavement on the roads.
So we're saving the city money, too.
Yes.
I've heard that elsewhere as well.
Oh, I'll echo the comments. Thank you for the presentation. It was very informative.
Thank you. Glad I had a chance to give it.
Let's move on to announcements.
Representative to the Transportation Commission, so it will be expanding to 7 members, and expect council considering appointments at their next meeting. And finally, I know there's been inquiries about the street tree inventory. We're expecting a presentation to the Parks Rec Open Space Commission at their June 8th meeting on the inventory. This is just the surveying what trees are out there as we work to get going on the management planning as the next phase.
Isn't there a public input on that going on now as well? Did I see something about that today?
We are, in advance of having a consultant on the street tree management plan, we are going to be doing, which maybe is live now, maybe, a survey as part of the starting of that planning process. So.
Can I ask about the timing of expanding the commission? When is the council meeting where the applications will be considered?
This next meeting is a week from Monday. What's the date?
First Monday in June.
June 5th.
That's correct, June 5th.
So people can still submit applications until when?
My understanding is applications are still open.
Until like June, till through that weekend even?
I would encourage anyone interested to apply before. That's a good question. So the agenda gets posted for council next Wednesday. So if council members are nominating in advance of that, then they might want to get their application in beforehand. If council members are still considering nominations, that would be listed on the agenda.
By Wednesday, the 31st. Would be a good goal for anybody who is interested in applying. Okay.
I would, recommend by Monday, but agenda doesn't get posted till Wednesday. I don't know, I can't say when council members are acting sort of in that lead up.
Okay, good to know.
Take the weekend. Get it in over the weekend.
Yeah, a long weekend.
Yeah.
And also, would we expect that if council takes action on that we will have a larger commission here at our very next meeting in June?
Yes, the ordinance, so their action at last meeting or 2 meetings ago, the 30 days for commissions that are by ordinance change in composition, 30 days sort of lagged since their action. So it didn't kick in for this meeting. But by next meeting, we are 7 seats. If they don't appoint, a quorum is 4 of the current appointees. if they do appoint, we'll have 7 people in attendance at next meeting.
Any other announcements? Go ahead.
This has been Bike to Anywhere Month and Bike to Work Month. The Strollers and Rollers held a Bike to Work Day event, which I saw some of you at on the last Thursday, May 18th. If you didn't get a Bike to Work musette bag and you would like one, come visit my trunk in the parking lot.
Anything else?
I didn't get one. I'll go to.
I'll fix you up.
Future agenda items.
There was a request at the last meeting to discuss or consider forming a subcommittee. If that's still of interest after this presentation, we can agendize it for the next meeting, probably. That was just a carryover from last month. Didn't want to lose track of that.
Can you remind us what the subcommittee was about?
This was on considering climate and emission reduction strategy, transportation strategies was my understanding. It was at the inquiry and behest of Climate Action Committee subcommittee, but
I think I made that request. And there's also, I believe, an outstanding question about whether a joint subcommittee of 2 commissions would have to be a Brown Act meeting committee.
I have information on that. I can forward it to you, Ken, and present it for a discussion if there's desire to consider that action.
I think we should have the agenda items so we can discuss whether it makes sense to have a subcommittee or just a representative, which might be more nimble. Or if we want to do that at all.
Anything else to discuss under future agenda items? Meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.